Welcome to another edition of Nevada on the Air. I'm your host, Mitch Fox, President and CEO of the Nevada Broadcasters Association, and I'm extremely pleased to have Congresswoman Susie Lee on the program. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mitch. Good to see you.
I want to give you a proper introduction. After moving to Nevada more than 30 years ago, you're coming up to your 30th anniversary, I think, she became one of the most respected leaders in the field of public education, working to decrease school dropout rates and provide after-school programming for Nevada students. As a member of Congress, she continues the fight to improve our public education system, but also tackles a long list of important issues pertaining to veterans, healthcare, and gun violence. Great to have you on the program today.
Good to be here, and thank you. You've been such a great leader in our community as well.
Well, thank you, Congressman. I appreciate that. So let's start with the horrific shooting at UNLV. Of course, we applaud the law enforcement officers were there to keep the casualties to a minimum. It's still, we lost 3 people, and it really begs the question, the carnage continues. What can be done?
Absolutely. Listen, our gun violence epidemic in this country is truly heartbreaking. I mean, I'm a mother. I have a freshman son at school. No parent wants to get that tweet or that text that, says run, hide, fight, like all the students and the faculty at UNLV. And, there's been 630 mass shootings in this country. This year alone, close to 50,000 people died by gun violence. This is truly a unique American experience. And the problem is there's so much we could do to prevent these senseless shootings. And like you said, our law enforcement officers who were, I think, on the scene within 72 seconds.
It's amazing.
And really, it was their response that prevented even more carnage. But you're right, the carnage just exists. I mean, I have many interactions with the UNLV community. I have 2 of my interns are students there, friends and family who have students and staff members who work there, who now have to deal with the trauma of going through that experience, and not to mention the loss of 3 really incredible professors. It's just really a sad time for our community.
Explain for some folks that are watching that may not know these congressional terms. You actually signed 4 discharge petitions to force votes on universal background checks and some other things. Explain that.
Yeah, so, the Republican Party has the majority in the House of Representatives, and we are trying to plead with them. This is not a partisan issue, and gun violence affects you whether you're a Democrat or an independent or a Republican. But the fact of the matter is the vast majority of the Republican Party are beholden to the gun lobby. We have tried to bring bipartisan bills to the floor, and a discharge petition is basically members of Congress exercising their authority by proposing a petition, trying to get enough signatures. We need 218 signatures. If you get 218 signatures, which is the majority of the House, to sign this petition, then the Speaker of the House has to bring it up to the floor for a vote. We're now at close to, I think it's 208. We still have 10 members that we need to convince to sign these. These are simple acts of, gun violence prevention. Closing the Charleston loophole, expanded background checks, safe storage. I mean, and we're really starting with things, the assault weapon ban as well, which is supported by the vast majority of Americans. These are common sense measures that we can take to bring that number down from close to 50,000 or, I say, let's get caught trying to do something to bring down this epidemic in our country and save lives.
Yeah. Let's move on to the drought. I think some people have been sort of lulled into some sort of complacency because of the rainfall last year. They think, we're out of the woods, but we're not, are we?
We are not out of the woods. Last year, obviously, was a high precipitation year in the Eastern Rockies, which is so good for replenishing the flows in the Colorado River. But we are still in a mega drought. And then this year being an El Nino year, the predictions are that there will be less precipitation. There have been agreements that have been made with the 7 states on the Colorado River to make initial cuts, but ultimately we came to an agreement that we would work to come to a better agreement by 2026. And so our work is not done by any stretch of the imagination. But I will say, Nevada and Southern Nevada leads the way in water conservation. And, I always give a huge shout out, one, to our residents that have gone through things like converting their turf to artificial grass or desert landscaping, to our legislature that has passed bills to help conserve water, and also to the Southern Nevada Water Authority that really has led the way. We reuse 40% of the water that is consumed, and of that 40%, over 90% is recycled. And so we have have just done an incredible job at conserving water. We actually have a reduction in 50%. Individuals consume 50% less water on average today than we did in 2002. So really, just a great effort here, but we still have work to do on the Colorado River.
We are still, even Nevada, sort of ahead of some other surrounding desert states like Arizona, right?
Absolutely.
They're sort of behind the curve, aren't they?
Absolutely, yeah. And, we had a big announcement the other day. Camille Touton, who is the Bureau of Reclamation Director, who is a UNLV grad, worked for Senator Reid. She was here to announce a $20 million investment in the wetlands project here. Again, this is an important resource because we get credits for the water that we return to Lake Mead clean, and so the wetlands and it basically all the runoff in Southern Nevada goes through that out to Lake Mead, and the investment in that will help us, one, rebuild the wetlands, clean the water as it goes into Lake Mead, and prevent erosion. And so really incredibly important to our whole ecosystem of water management here. So very exciting announcement the other day.
So that farm bill, people don't associate a farm bill with drought prevention, but it does have something, doesn't it?
Well, listen, traditionally, water is ruled by water rights, right? And it's, if you got a water right first, you have a top priority on your water usage. And we know that agriculture users are the biggest users of water. And, traditionally, there has been a battle between urban versus ag. But ultimately, we all have to work together. It is a limited resource, and we know that. And so, in the ag bill, I am proposing that drought management be included in that. That farmers get credit for that, for what they do to reduce water. As part of the Inflation Reduction Act, we included money that we are paying farmers to change their crops to less water-intensive crops or fallow out their fields. You've heard this statistic or statement that alfalfa is being grown in Arizona. That's an intense water user. And so, again, we need to be all hands on deck. We can obviously work at conservation and reusing water, but we also have to work on how are we managing the water we have. And so really important piece of legislation. And, it's a delicate situation. Obviously, we need our farmers, we need ag, but I think we all have a responsibility to use it more diligently and be, more concerned about our water usage.
You've continued to make public education a priority, and we certainly applaud teachers getting their raise. They've waited a long time for
Absolutely.
this raise.
Much needed for our teachers. It was a big win for our teachers here in Southern Nevada.
They're finally going to get their raise. What can be done to improve student outcomes on a federal level? I realize it's a local issue, and local school boards and state legislatures appropriate money. But what are you monitoring on a federal level to help that?
Well, listen, one thing on the federal level is doing what we can to promote teacher education and the teacher pipeline. And as you know, we have a teacher shortage here in Southern Nevada, and continuing to support efforts, through the Department of Labor, to support apprenticeship programs. I'm going to give a special shout out to UNLV has a program called Nevada Forward. They just received a grant from the Department of Labor. This is basically an alternative, allowing people who are already in the education ecosystem, like support professionals, to get on a path to get their teacher certificate. Many of them go back to the very schools that they already serve because they're committed to the mission of helping those kids. As you know, a lot of our teacher shortage exists in our most at-risk schools, and they're being served by substitute teachers. And so that's a big issue to how are we getting teachers into the pipeline. Obviously, pay is important, making sure we're continuing to fight for collective bargaining to allow people to bargain to make sure they get the pay that they deserve. And then on a school level basis, as you know, my background was with Communities and Schools, a dropout prevention program. We know that per pupil, Nevada is below the national average in terms of funding. I have a bill called the Community Serving Schools Act, which is basically to promote and support wraparound services, whether it's mental health or helping people with food security and things like that, bringing those resources into the schools so that teachers can focus on what they're there to do, is teach. And we know that poverty is the number one barrier to student achievement. So how are we getting resources into the schools to help them deal with the barriers that poverty brings to the classroom? And that's what Community Serving Schools Act is about.
Let's talk about public health for a little bit. Some folks tend to forget the Inflation Reduction Act actually lowered prescription drug prices for seniors. And then recently you had two bills actually passed in a bipartisan way that went even further, not necessarily on the prescription drug issue, but for health care. Health care is a big issue for folks. It's still unaffordable for many.
Absolutely. Listen, the Inflation Reduction Act was so important. Insulin being capped at $35 a month, $2,000 out-of-pocket cap for seniors. Medicare negotiating prescription drug prices, which the basis of that is you allow Medicare to negotiate those drug prices. The largest consumer of prescription drugs, they're going to have the buying power to negotiate, bring that cost down, and we've already see it have trickle-down impacts, even insulin, to people who were not on Medicare. So those are super important. I just passed the Insurance Transparency Act, which basically requires insurance companies to be more transparent about what they charge for prescription drugs, what they charge for, to cover healthcare costs. And so the basis of that bill was more transparency means that Nevadans can shop around and figure out what insurance policy is best suited for them, helps reduce costs. People know what they're buying. As you know, it's so opaque when it comes to healthcare costs. Like you go into a hospital, you sort of want to know what it's going to cost you if you have a broken leg, and there's not that much transparency around that. So that bill's really aimed to bring things to light. And then I also passed the TREAT Act, which is additional resources to help mostly nonprofit organizations deal with young people, addiction and abuse, opioid abuse. And so two really important bills for Nevada.
I wanted to finish on something because I've been in this town long enough to remember Mayor Bill Breer and the bullet train. And everyone said, this is a pipe dream. It'll never happen. We'll never get a high-speed rail between here and California. But Brightline West we are actually going to get a train.
I know. Well, listen, our economy is dependent on what's happening along the I-15 corridor. 50 million people visit our city each year from California. 85% of them do it by car. If you've ever traveled on I-15, it's horrendous.
It's a nightmare.
It's what should be like a 4-hour drive is now sometimes 8 hours. Not good for our economy. But first and foremost, this is a piece of legislation, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was passed under President Biden. Again, I say bipartisan. There were 13 Republicans who voted for it. But this is the investment, $3 billion investment. And by the way, they already have their permitting work done. They have their environmental work done. I mean, we believe this is going to be up and running before the 2028 Olympics. Really incredible resource for us, not to mention reduction in car emissions, but also 35,000 jobs in getting it built. And more importantly, reducing the travel time to 2 hours from Southern California. And so we're really excited about this. This, as you said, it's been in the works for decades, and it really took us passing the bipartisan infrastructure bill to help get those needed resources to make it a reality here.
One last question that has to do with, you're a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus, and in a Congress that's constantly perceived as being more polarized than ever, even polarized within one particular party. How do you make it work? How do you find people that are willing to find a middle ground? What goes into that?
Yeah, well, listen, there's 435 members of Congress. There's 64 members of the Problem Solvers Caucus. I wish the Problem Solvers Caucus had 435 members. That's what Congress should be called. Our really basic premise is that we know there are common areas that we need to work together. For instance, the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That bill, we joke about it, was infrastructure week for, the entire Trump presidency. And then you come in and President Biden was starting to negotiate it and it hit a wall and it was completely dead. It was a group of bipartisan members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, members of the Senate. Senator Jackie Rosen was in that group. And we got together. We actually traveled to Annapolis, Maryland, and we sat down and said, we have got to get this done. I mean, our infrastructure in this country is crumbling. I mean, it was embarrassing. And so what we did, so many times in Washington, negotiations start with, this is my red line and this is my red line. Well, if you start with your red lines, then how are you ever going to talk about what areas bring you together and you have in common? And so, like in the instance of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we talked about these are things that Democrats are never going to agree to. These are things that Republicans are never going to agree to. And these are the things we have in common. Let's take what we have in common and put that together as the framework to get this passed. And that ultimately is what resurrected that bill and then ultimately became law. And that's really, how we work on some of these tougher issues. The debt ceiling negotiations, again, came together as a result of us sitting down and trying to work out, what it is that we can agree to. And so, again, there's so many opportunities for us to work together. And we need to make sure we start from the middle and not from the ends. And that's really what the Problem Solvers is about. As you know, I've been ranked by Common Ground as the most bipartisan member of Congress. This is one of the reasons I ran for Congress, not being a politician before I ran. I mean, I was a nonprofit executive. I was frustrated, just like the majority of Americans, that the dysfunction in Washington really prevents Congress from focusing on issues that make people's lives better. And we need more people who are willing to come to the center, because I don't want to live in a world where you have to have a president and the Senate and the House as one party to ever get anything done. I think that, and then when the tide shifts, then, the next Congress or two Congresses later, they spend their whole time trying to erase what was done under the partisan majority of the previous administration. And so I think that we're better served by more durable legislation, and that only happens when we work together.
Very good. Congresswoman, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
All right. Thanks, Mitch.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.